Good evening, I'm Joel Flynn in Hong Kong. Welcome to View TV News. Coming up on tonight's show. Another terror attack hits London with at least one dead and almost a dozen injured after a van mounted a pavement, this time apparently targeting Muslims. Officials cave to pressure and drop charges against a grandmother who sold a piece of cardboard without a hawker's license. And an 11-year-old boy who had a failing heart receives a heart transplant after waiting for almost a year. Britain has been attacked. 4 words that the world has heard repeatedly in the last few months. Today it's happened again after a van mounted a pavement near a mosque in North London, killing 1 person and injuring at least 10 others. No motive has officially been declared yet, but the incident has been described as a terror attack. Graham Mackay has the details of another horrific night for the city.
Emergency services rushing to a North London street in the early hours of Monday after a vehicle rammed pedestrians at Finsbury Park just after midnight. Police say 1 person is dead and several others wounded, with many receiving treatment at the scene. The British Muslim Council says a van ploughed through worshippers as they were leaving a mosque after prayers. Eyewitnesses describe what they saw.
Basically drove on the pavement, coming straight towards all the Muslims, and as he's coming to them, he hit all of them, and I think 1 of them died.
Reuters UK Bureau Chief Guy Falconbridge is in London.
The police have simply said that they've arrested 1 person. We don't know who that was or what was driving them to do this, but obviously the fear is that this is some sort of revenge attack on the Muslim community for the militant attacks that have taken place in Britain over the last 3 months.
Britain is on edge after recent bloody attacks involving vans, including one earlier this month when Islamic militants mowed down 8 people.
Well, barely a few weeks after a similar attack in London Bridge, questions about security and safety are bound to grow louder. To find out more, we're joined by Angeline Ong in London. And this seems to have targeted Muslims, this attack. What more do we know right now?
Well, as you said, Joel, here's what we know so far. A van ploughed into worshippers leaving a London mosque on Monday. At least 1 person was killed and 10 injured. Out of those that were hurt, 8 have been taken to hospital. Now, witnesses said the hired van swerved into a group of people, leaving prayers shortly after midnight at the Finsbury Park Mosque, one of the biggest in the country. Neil Basu, Senior National Coordinator for Counter-Terrorism Policing, says the incident had all the hallmarks of a terrorist incident. The encouraging news, Joel, is that the van driver did not get away. He was held by members of the public and he's now been arrested and his mental state will be checked, say the police. Now, no one knows exactly what his motives were, but the Muslim Council of Britain said this attack is the most violent manifestation of Islamophobia in the UK in recent months. It's now calling for extra security at places of worship. The UK Prime Minister Theresa May said police are treating this incident as a potential terrorist attack, and she will chair an emergency response meeting later today.
And this is, of course, happening on the same day that Britain's supposed to be beginning their Brexit negotiations with the European Union. With all the problems at home, particularly on security issues, how well has the country been able to plan for these talks?
Well, the truth is, no one really knows. These talks are historic, and Brexit Secretary David Davis is calling for a deal like no other in history. He's kicking off negotiations today in Brussels that will set the terms on which Britain leaves the European Union. Now, Davis will meet Chief EU negotiator Michel Barnier, a former French minister, at a European Commission's Berlaymont headquarters at 0900 GMT, and they're due to give a joint news conference after the talks. Now, May's team, of course, say they are prepared, but these talks come amid trouble at home. May's political status remains in doubt 10 days after she lost her majority in the snap election she called. And also not forgetting, as you mentioned, the latest terror attacks in Manchester, London Bridge, and now a mosque and the Tower block fire has been taking attention away from these Brexit talks. Now, it's too much to expect anything from just a day of talks, say officials, but the 2 sides will probably focus on housekeeping, like how often Barnier and Davis and their teams will meet, the agenda and what order the items will be discussed, and there's probably going to be a lot of bridge building after all that mudslinging in the early stages, before they get to those key issues or stumbling blocks such as the customs union and the single market. Back to you, Joel.
All right, Ange, thanks a lot for that. To the Middle East now, where the United States military has claimed self-defense after it shot down a Syrian fighter jet in the country's northern city of Raqqa. The Syrian army says its pilot is missing in the first such move by the United States since the start of the conflict in 2011. Grace Lee has more.
A U.S. Hornet warplane shooting a Syrian fighter jet out of the sky on Sunday. Washington says it was acting in self-defense and that the Syrian plane had dropped bombs near U.S.-backed forces, while Damascus says it was downed while flying a mission against Islamic State militants. It's the first time a Syrian jet has been hit by the U.S. since the start of the conflict in 2011. The Syrian army is calling it an attempt to undermine its efforts as the only effective force in fighting terrorism across the country. The U.S.-led coalition has been aggressively ramping up its aerial bombing campaign in Syria, recently capturing several districts near Raqqa from militants. Officials tell Reuters skirmishes have been breaking out between the Syrian army and U.S.-backed forces around Raqqa as both sides tried to recapture turf from Islamic State. Warplanes from the U.S.-led coalition have also struck pro-government forces several times in recent weeks. Washington also describes those strikes as self-defense.
To local news now, and the government has dropped charges against an elderly woman accused of selling cardboard without a hawker's licence. The incident spurred public outcry, with some Hong Kongers calling officials cold-hearted. Earlier today, the Civic Party handed the government a petition letter with 14,000 signatures from the public demanding the officials drop the charges. The controversy happened last Sunday when the 75-year-old grandma sold a piece of cardboard she'd collected to a domestic helper for $1 in Central. She was accused by a number of Food and Environmental Hygiene Department officials of breaking the law as she didn't hold a hawker's licence. Now, ahead of the 20th anniversary of the city's handover back to China, the director of Beijing's liaison office in Hong Kong has hit out at critics and opponents of the government. In an interview with Chinese state media, Zhang Xiaoming said the SAR could have been better off. Without naming anyone specifically, Zhang said looking back over the last 2 decades, it was regretful some people had politicised everything in the city. He said that made it difficult for the government to solve economic and livelihood problems, but Zhang also praised the way the administration applied the basic law. He cited Beijing's appointment of SAR government officials and its role in major issues, including political reform, as examples. Another principal official to leave the administration after its term ends next week, Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development Greg So confirmed he won't stay to run for another year after the 9 years he's already spent in the Bureau. In an interview with Now TV, the minister wouldn't say whether CE-elect Carrie Lam had invited him to join her incoming team, only that he'd been thinking about it, leaving since late last year. So also refuted claims that Chief Executive CY Leung tried to fire him over the HKTV free-to-air television licence controversy. He said he might go back to practising law, but will first spend some time with his family. An 11-year-old boy has been given a second chance at life after receiving a heart transplant he'd waited for a whole year. At a press conference, Tan Kai Him and his mother thanked the donor and donor's family for saving his life. The boy had suffered from heart failure 3 years ago and had been relying on external heart pumps. He finally received a donation last Monday and underwent an 8-hour-long operation at Queen Mary Hospital. A cardiologist said the many operations Tang received over the years made the surgery particularly difficult.
Because he has multiple replacement of the device and has been a long time, there was a lot of scar during the operation that may require extra time to free the heart and then replace the donor heart into the body.
Heartwarming story, that one. OK, coming up next, the latest from the world of business. OK, let's kick off with a look at today's market action. A fairly solid start to the week for shares in Hong Kong. The Hang Seng Index advancing 1.2% to close at 25,924 points. Investors clawing back some of last week's steep losses. Retailers and insurers leading the charge. Sentiment got a boost thanks to signs liquidity conditions are improving. Meanwhile, average new home prices in China's 70 major cities rose 0.7% in May from the previous month. That's according to an official Reuters survey out today. Compared with a year ago, new builds were up 10.4% in May, just a touchdown from April's 10.7% rise. Data suggested property investment in the country remains robust despite government efforts to curb surging prices. Science Japan's economic recovery is on track. Exports surged the most in 2 years in May, thanks to higher shipments of cars and steel. The 14.9% increase was the biggest since January 2015, although it did still come in below analyst expectations. Of a 16.1% bump, imports rose 17.8%, partly due to demand for intermediate goods companies needing to manufacture their products. Meanwhile, households in the UK are feeling the pinch as rising inflation puts a squeeze on spending power. A survey by IHS Markit showing how households feel about their personal finances fell to 45.8 in June, down from 47.1 in May. The 50-point level indicates no change. It's the most pessimistic reading in 3 months and one of the lowest readings since the end of 2013. Inflation hit 2.9% in May, its highest level in nearly 4 years. Well, to India next, where the rise of Hindu nationalism has prompted the shutdown of slaughterhouses across the country. As Grace Lee reports, it's also meant job losses for some of the country's poorest.
Tucked away in the back streets of Agra in northern India, a multi-billion-dollar industry that employs many of the city's poorest people. Leather has been made here for centuries, but recently the industry has been taking a hit as Hindu hardliners crack down on the slaughter of cows, which they consider sacred. From global brands like Gucci and Louis Vuitton to high street stores like H&M and Clark's, India has been exporting leather goods globally since the early 90s. Combined with the